Hello, welcome to your second Roblox beginner scripting tutorial. In the last video, we looked into referencing objects within the game and the properties of those objects. So in today's video, we're going to be getting into functions, variables, and scope. So I already have a script within server script service. So you can insert a script into there, and I'm going to get you to delete this line. So I'm going to first look into what variables are. So variables are a name that is assigned a value. So for example, I can call my variable and make it equal to 5. So to declare a variable, you first give it the name and then equals and then to the value that you want your variable to be equal to. So I'm going to go ahead and print my variable. But what is print? Well, print is actually a function, and we'll be getting into what functions are in a few minutes. But first, I just want you to know that when you do print, it's going to print to the output down here. So for example, when you open the script, you first saw print hello world. If you were to run this, you'll actually see down in the output, it says hello world from script line 1. And this is this right here. So if I have a variable and I print my variable, it's actually going to print what the variable is equal to. So when I reference the name, my variable, it's referencing this right here. So if I go ahead and run this, you can see it prints 5 down in the output. So variables can actually be equal to a bunch of different values. So this is 5 here is an int value. If you remember from last video, int values are whole numbers, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And we also looked into Boolean values, which is just true or false. And another important value, which you've probably seen, is a string. So a string is just text. So to define a string, you put 2 quotation marks and then whatever you want inside of them. So my variable is now equal to hello world. So if I print my variable, it'll print down here hello world. All right, so you've learned 3 different data types, which are int values, Boolean values, and string values. Okay, so now we're going to get into what functions are. So if you remember earlier, I said print is actually a function, but what does that mean? Well, to define a function, you first use the function keyword and then the name of your function. So I'll just call this my function. And then you put 2 parentheses, open and close, and then it'll fill in an end block for you. So what is a function? Well, a function is a code block that can be called, and when it's called, the code that is inside of this function will run. So if I put print hello world inside of here, I can call my function by doing the name of the function and then 2 parentheses. So this will call the function, my function, and run whatever is inside of here. So this will run print hello world, which will then print to the output hello world. So functions are useful when you have a piece of code that you may want to use in your script multiple times. So for example, if I had multiple print statements in here, like this, I wouldn't want to copy and then paste this multiple times and print this over and over and over again. I could just wrap this code in a function and then call this function multiple times. So you can see, since I've called it 3 times, it'll run whatever's in this code block 3 times. So if I play it, you can see it prints it 3 times over. So now let's go ahead and do something useful with our function. So I'm going to go and put a part into the game, and I'm going to want to change this part to the color red when the game runs. So I'll go back in my script, and I'll make a variable called part, and I'll make it equal to game.workspace.part. But hold on, why is this underlined? Well, if we go down here in script analysis or hover over it, you can see it says global part is only used in the enclosing function. Consider changing it to local. What does that mean? So this ties into what scopes are. So there's 2 different types of scopes. There's global and there's local. By the way, this is just a comment. So whatever is after these 2 dashes won't run. So I can, just say a function. This is for like leaving comments in your code and describing what it does, whatnot. So there are 2 different types of scopes. There's global and there's a local scope. So this is called a global variable because there's no local keyword in front of it. What does local mean? Well, local means that whatever comes after this, so is a variable, can only be accessed within that scope. So the scope is the code block. So this here, all of this within this function is a scope. What's outside of here is called the global scope. So anything can access what's in here. Any piece of code, any code block can access what is out here in the global scope. So you can see that when I put the local keyword in front of the variable, it actually went away. The underline went away. So if I were to try and access this variable outside of this function, so let's say I want to print part, you can see this gets underlined and it says unknown global part. That's because this variable can only be accessed within this code block because it's a local variable. So this may be kind of confusing. Why do I have to put local in front of variables, and why am I not able to access this variable outside of this scope? I know when I was starting out, I was really confused as to why I had to put local in front of all of my variables. But a general rule of thumb is whenever you're declaring a variable, you should put local in front of it. So I could say local variable equals 5. That's because your code will run faster if you have local variables and not global variables. You also won't get this annoying underline when you do that. So if I were to do like this, then I get a underline here. So just remember, a general good rule of thumb is to put local in front of all of your variables. So let's say I want to make the value of this variable equal to that part. And I do local part equals game.workspace.part. All right, now I'm going to continue on with making this part red when the server starts. So I have a function called my function, and inside of this function, I'm setting a local variable called part that is equal to game.workspace.part. So to make this part red, I'm going to access the property brick color. So you say part, and because part is equal to game.workspace.part, when I say part, it's actually referencing this part right here. So I can say part dot brick color is equal to brick color dot new really red. So when you're changing the brick color, this is what you have to do. You have to do brick color dot new, and then in quotation marks what color you want. So I'm gonna pick really red, which is this color right here. So I go ahead and run that, you can see it turns the turns the part red, and you can see it's gray here. All right, so I'll be looking into the last concept of this video, which ties into functions, which is parameters and arguments. So if I define a function here, I'm going to call this add numbers. And then I can call this function. So these parentheses are actually here for a reason. And you can actually input variables into these parentheses, but they're not called variables. These are called parameters. So for example, I can say number 1 and number 2. So when you're defining the function and you put in names in between these parentheses, these are called parameters. And when you are inputting, so you can think of these as placeholders. So for example, I can do print number 1 plus number 2. And so you can actually think of these here as placeholders for what you're going to pass in when calling the function. So I can input 3 and 5. So when I'm calling the function, I call the function and I'm going to input the arguments 3 and 5. So this will then go up here, look at the add numbers function, and see the parameters. So it's going to set the parameter number 1 to 3 and number 2 to 5. And so since number 1 and number 2, since number 1 is now 3 and number 2 is now 5, you can think of this as print 3 plus 5. And when I play this, you can see it prints 8 in the console. So I can, I can change these numbers. I could do, for example, like 35 plus 90, which should print 125. Oh, whoops. I meant to put a comma. So I can put 35 and 90. So now that should work. 125 there. And so I can do different things with these parameters. So for example, I could do maybe print number 1 times number 2. So then I'm going to input 4 and 7. So it should input 20 or output 28, which it does. All right, so just for another refresher, when you define a function, what's in these parentheses here are called parameters, and you can think of them as placeholders for what you're going to input when calling the function. So when I call this function, I'm inputting the numbers 4 and 7. So it'll come up here, it'll see number 1, number 2, and since 4 is the first thing that I inputted when calling the function, it'll set number 1 to 4, and then number 2 is the second thing, so 7 will be set to number 2, and then I'm printing number 1 times number 2, which will just be 4 times 7. All right, so that's it for this episode of Beginner's Scripting Tutorial. If you have any questions, you can put them down in the comments. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe. It'll help me out a lot. And yeah, so I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.